Better Buildings for Humans is powered by Advanced Glazings, makers of the Solera line of products. Solera is the leading glass glazing made specifically for architectural daylighting and with extreme insulation performance. Learn more at advancedglazings.com. Hello and welcome to this week's episode of Better Buildings for Humans. I'm your host, Joe Menchefski, and this is the podcast where we take a look at the impact that the built environment has on our health, our wellness, our productivity, and our general joy of being alive. And of course, we have to talk about sustainable design as well. I've got somebody from Nova Scotia here. Everybody who listens to the show knows where I live. And I've got a guest from Nova Scotia, and I'm so excited. I want to introduce you to Gena Arthur from Pure Paint. Gena, welcome. It's a pleasure to have you here.
Oh, thank you, Joe. Thank you so much for having me. It's always a pleasure to connect with a fellow Nova Scotian.
Yeah, and especially on something that matters to both of us. Let's get to know you a little bit first. I want you to tell us about your background and make sure
Okay.
that you emphasize the pathway that led to the founding of Pure Paints. Okay. And that way our audience will get to know you a little bit better before we dive into some details.
A- Absolutely. My background blends environmental science, sustainable design, innovation, and entrepreneurship. But my deeper path started long before Pure Paint. I've been studying and practicing and teaching natural building for many years. So, working with regenerative techniques such as earthen walls, straw bale construction, lime plasters, all of that amazing stuff. And I've been teaching and sharing that where I've been helping others explore what it means to live and build with earthen materials. So that work is rooted in something very personal, a very deep love and reverence for nature. From a young age, I felt most at home in wild spaces, everything that Nova Scotia has to offer us. And that connection became a real guiding force in how I see the world and later how I chose to design, build, and live. And I've also always believed that the materials that we surround ourselves with should reflect the natural world, not harm it. So then, through that lens, while I was already working with these ancient natural paint formulas like lime, clay, oils, all of which stood the test of time throughout humanity, with examples from cave walls to the frescoes of the Renaissance. But I tried to bring those ideas into modern spaces, and I began to look more closely at what's in conventional paint. So at the time, it was believed it was responsible for 10% of the world's microplastic pollution. I'm talking about latex and acrylic, which felt really staggering at the time. But then recent research has now confirmed that paint is actually the number one contributor responsible for 50% of all microplastics globally in the
Wow.
ocean, in our waterways, and on land. And this is not just an environmental issue, this is a public health emergency hiding right in plain sight. So, I founded Pure Paint Laboratories as a research and development company with a mission to bring material science and modern innovation to the ancient art of natural paint. And our goal was really bold to create a plant based, petroleum free, and toxin free paint that performs identically to the latex and acrylics that we find on our homes and workspaces today, but without a single drop of plastic. And I'm so happy to say that we've done exactly that.
So you have product in the marketplace now, Gena?
We do, and I'll get to that a little bit later, but our product is currently available on our website, purepaint.ca. And I'll tell you a little bit about our big plans here in a little bit.
Okay, all right. Let's start right off with the question that comes to everybody's mind when we start talking about more sustainable alternatives, and that's performance. How does a plant-based paint hold up relative to conventional paints? I assume it's organic and biodegradable.
Mhm.
Inherently, you would think it has a shorter lifespan. But tell us, how does it compare in terms of performance and longevity?
It performs beautifully, and not just for a plant-based paint, but by any standard. Our paint was engineered to meet the demands of modern architecture while staying rooted in nature. So it's made with very high quality minerals, cold pressed plant oils, and other naturally occurring materials that give it a rich, luxurious finish. So it just doesn't coat a wall, it transforms it. The way it refracts light creates depth and warmth that's that synthetic and plastic paints simply can never achieve. It's very elegant, tactile, and alive, but it's also very tough. So we've met or exceeded all ASTM standards for drying time, adhesion, washability, long term durability. And this has all been validated by third party laboratories, and our paint is in many commercial and residential buildings. But it goes further, literally. While most latex and acrylics cover 3 to 400 square feet per gallon, pure paint offers up to between 30 to 100%, depending on which finish you're using, more coverage. So it's making it both efficient and cost effective. And yes, it's biodegradable, but only when it's meant to be. On your walls, it holds strong, but unlike conventional paints, it won't persist in landfills or when it sheds off buildings or in our homes or ecosystems for generations to come. It breaks down safely, leaving no microplastics behind. And perhaps most significantly, on top of that, by eliminating petroleum and plastics from our product, pure paint reduces greenhouse gas emissions by over 90% compared to conventional latex and acrylic. And that's a massive win for the planet with no compromise on performance. This is a paint that performs like all the best, and then we like to say lives like the future.
Do you want to bring lots of healthy, beautiful, natural light in your building and still meet energy codes? Try Solera from Advanced Glazings. Learn more at advancedglazings.com. Oh, fantastic. Yeah, it's been shown millions of times that the market will not accept poorer performance just because the label is green on it. Maybe in the early days of green marketing, but now people need performance as well as the green label. So I'm just delighted to hear that it's beyond equivalent. It's better than
Right.
equivalent in terms of performance. So that is fantastic news. Okay, Gina, I want to talk about color variety. I am sort of partially colorblind, and I'm almost always completely overwhelmed when I go into Home Depot or one of the paint stores with like these walls of like really subtle different colors. Do you have the ability to have such an incredible spectrum of colors from pure paint?
Yes, absolutely. One of the common myths about natural paint is that it is limited in color, and that couldn't be further from the truth. So, we've developed an extensive designer driven color system inspired by nature and tailored for modern architecture and interiors. It includes hundreds of curated shades that are sophisticated, on trend, and timeless. But here's the game changer: our in house color imagery department can precisely match any existing color in the world, whether it's a designer favorite, a commercial brand, or even a custom shade from fabric or furniture. We can replicate it without using the petroleum based tint system. So you never really have to choose between purity and personalization.
That's amazing. Do you do any sort of upcharges or anything like that for matching or?
Yeah, we offer like with each of our partners, so our retail partners, for example, we create curated color palettes with and for them that are colors that their customers already love.
Right.
We also do offer color matching for some of our architect designer clientele. And certainly, if an individual has an existing color in their home and they don't want to reintroduce more petroleum derived paint to their home, we can color match to those as well.
I just had a crazy question pop into my head. I'm going off script already, so forgive me. But if I walked into a room and it was painted with your product, would I notice that the paint looked different than what I would expect based on a lifetime of looking at conventional paints?
No, like I always like to say, sort of what I had said earlier is that our paint has a very elevated, luxurious finish due to the fact that we use such a high level. It's just loaded with high quality minerals and plant oils. So the light definitely refracts differently in the
Right.
paint, giving it a much warmer, vibrant feeling. But as far as just walking in the room and noticing, no. And the same with application. This paint performs identically in every way to latex and acrylic, in that you can, brush, roll, or spray it.
Right on. Do you have the ability to control the level of gloss, Gina?
Oh, most certainly. We
Okay.
offer our paint, well, in our Origins interior line, we offer a primer, a matte, a velour, and a satin finish. So very similar to the finishes that you would find with any conventional paint.
Right on. Okay. I got a bunch of, well, not a bunch, but a few, I'll call them rapid fire questions that, relatively short answer questions, I think, anyway. And don't feel restricted to a short
Sure.
answer if it demands a long answer. First of all, paints from Pure Paint, are they more safe or less safe in a fire situation?
That's a really tough question. I would have to say more safe, and primarily for the fact that there's no petroleum content.
Right.
So they release far fewer toxic fumes and
Hmm.
no plastic based smoke in the event of a fire.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Okay. What about like, the materials that people use to apply them, the brushes, the rollers, that sort of, is it all the conventional brushes and rollers? Do all of those work with your paint?
It most certainly does. It applies just exactly like conventional paint. And this was one I think you had said or we had talked about earlier on, about how important it was to not try to create something different outside of what people were used to. So the product
Yeah.
applies exactly like conventional paint, uses standard brushes, rollers, or sprayers, no special tools required at all. And in fact, the painters that have used our product, they always say, "Oh my gosh, like this is just so amazing. Like I don't have to change. It goes on identically. Like they really wouldn't even know the difference unless they were specifically told what's in the can."
That makes it just so much easier for, the market to adapt at. Supply chain, you've got this variety of minerals and plant-based materials. Do you
Mm.
worry about the reliability of that supply chain?
No, not at all. We work with renewable agriculture resources, which make our supply chain more resilient and future proofed rather than dependent on fossil fuel
Right.
derivatives.
Right. You're always going to be able to plant it and grow it if necessary, as opposed to trying to find a new storage somewhere buried in the earth. So, yeah,
Right.
I like that. Where are you manufacturing, Gina? I know you're based in Windsor, Nova Scotia, just a little bit north of Halifax. Are you manufacturing there as well?
We certainly are. We proudly manufacture here in Nova Scotia out of Windsor. But I will say that we do have plans to scale across Canada and the US to meet the growing demand. So over the coming years, you will hear that we're going to be popping up blending facilities near to distribution centers in
Right.
relation to our retail partners.
I love it. All right. Let's talk about UV light. UV light is great cleanser of internal spaces, but it's also, it brings damage on to some things. How does UV light affect your paint? And again, relative to a conventional paint that's exposed to UV light.
Right. Well, pure paint is formulated with UV stable mineral and biopigments that offer excellent resistance to fading. Like any paint, in 50 or 60 years from now, there may be some gradual fading that will occur in direct sunlight, but our paints are designed to last a lifetime. And the finish ages gracefully and, maintain a consistent appearance while being free from the brittleness and breakdowns that plastic based paints often experience under UV stress.
No blotches or lines or waves or anything like
Mm,
that as it fades. Okay. Well, that's good to know. That's really good to know. I've seen that. I've seen like it almost looked like a series of waves in a conventional paint that I
right.
did at home one day, and then over a couple of years it was really weird. Yeah, and it was remarkable how it formed this pattern, even though the way I applied it was definitely did not follow that same pattern, but I got fading that way. Anyway,
Interesting.
yeah, it was truly bizarre. Anyway, enough about my Joe's painting at home experience. Let's talk about your journey in launching and scaling the company. I mean, I've been involved with multiple startups in my life, and I know how difficult it is and stressful. Let's talk about the lessons that you've learned, right? So we'll certainly we're going to talk about sustainability and human health, but let's talk a little bit about startups. What lessons have you learned, Gina, about overcoming market barriers, code compliance, cost issues, supply chains, anything like that. All right. When you're introducing a healthier material alternative, to well-established mainstream practices and materials.
Right.
What were the things that that you had to fight to push
Oh,
through?
there were a few. Well, we've learned that creating a better material isn't enough. You really have to dive in and unravel and rebuild the system around it. The paint industry is built on petroleum, and that shows up not just in the ingredients, but in regulatory codes, in certification pathways, and even the way products are tested. So we've had to navigate outdated testing methods, outdated certification processes, and really push
Right.
back against things like misleading environmental product declarations and prove that our materials in a real world application are very different from those. I use like an environmental product declaration as an example. Environmental product declarations for paint in particular, the product category rule from that was written by the Paint Coatings Association. So it really only represents latex and acrylic paints, and it doesn't contain any of the information about microplastics, PFAS, BPAs, phthalates, other endocrine disrupting chemicals, and other toxicities that are in there. It just focuses on things like greenhouse gas or whatever. So it's not really fully disclosing. When we went to create our EPD, I was sort of shocked and like, this is really important information for us to include in the EPD. But because the product category rule didn't mandate it, then we couldn't do it. Similarly, for like performance standard testing, the Master Painters Institute is a performance standard that's used by federal, provincial, and municipal governments here in Canada, but they don't have a category for natural paint. And they wanted us to certify under a latex category for performance. And so
Right.
these were just things that, and it's been a true barrier to market for us. In some ways, it's felt preventing us to market. But luckily, we found ways to work around that, both through dealing with like the federal government, who's been so incredibly supportive of our product development and wanting to use our product in their federal buildings and assets, right down to, dealing, in some cases, dealing with environmental standards that were created outside of North America and that sort of are elevated above some of the standards here.
Yeah, that is really interesting. I guess whoever goes first creates all the rules and then sort of forces everybody else to play according to their rules, which, if it's a significant enough paradigm shift, the rules don't truly apply. So it becomes a barrier to entry
Right.
to any sort of innovation. Yeah, really interesting challenge there for you. Have you been promoting the product in Europe at all?
No, we haven't.
Yeah.
The North American architectural coating industry is, about a 23, $24 billion industry.
Yeah.
And certainly our primary focus is here in our backyard to
Yeah.
help, create healthier spaces for a healthier planet for the people here. Someday down the road, I mean, there's lots of other opportunities, but we, first certainly are bringing it to market here in Canada and the United States.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I'm just curious because the Europeans are a little bit ahead of us as far as, adopting more biological based materials for sure.
Yeah, Canada's catching up though.
Yes.
And you'd be surprising, like, the American market, I mean, the Architect Association and the Decorators Association, and even in talking with architects in the United States, well, both the United States here and in Canada, they're feeling the pressure to create healthier building envelopes. These people care about the future too. And so they are doing the work too. They're uniting to try to create healthier building envelopes.
Yeah, that's good to hear. Now, certifications. Do
Mm.
you have any of these, green or health conscious certifications?
Right. So some of the certifications can help, especially progressive frameworks like Living Building Challenge or Product Challenge, well building standards, and parts of LEED that prioritize material health and transparency.
Yep.
Those systems, reward products that are free from carcinogens, hormone disrupting chemicals, microplastics, etc., which really puts us ahead of our competitors. But however, many of the certifications still focus really narrowly on carbon and
Right.
other things that aren't really addressing the bigger problem, which means truly clean materials can get lumped in with certifications that are found on products that contain all of those problematic ingredients. So we are working kind of within the system, but also pushing to improve it.
The conflict between a single-minded focus on carbon and the need to really look more broadly at what sustainable and healthy buildings really need to be is really fascinating to me. And I'm sort of, I mean, I work in daylight, and if you have more windows that bring in high quality natural light,
Mm.
people worry that it's not as effective in terms of energy management. You want pure opaque walls that don't bring in any light to maximize energy efficiency, but at the same time, it becomes an unhealthy, crappy building that nobody wants to be in. And it sounds like you've got some of those same sorts of trade offs that you have to
Yeah,
face.
exactly. I mean, you think about it. Well, these, first of all, when you've got a product on your wall that contains things like BPA's,
Yep.
phthalates, other endocrine disrupting chemicals, PFAS chemicals, PHA,
Mm.
it's not really the VOCs that you need to be worried about. It's these non-VOCs. And, especially here in North America, where we're heating and cooling our homes all the time, and that's changing the dynamics of what's happening in those films on the wall. And those walls also shed into our home. We think about, well, how did paint make up 50% of the microplastics in the ocean? And with a half a million commercial painters in North America washing their paintbrushes every day,
Right.
and the spillage and the shedding off of buildings into waterways, land, into septic systems, into water treatment facilities, into rivers and the oceans. And those microplastics and the toxins in those microplastics, they don't discriminate. They're found in the smallest microorganism to the largest mammal, and not excluding plants. It's being found in paint microparticles are being found in human brains, in their bodies, and human placentas, in breast milk. They're being found in just literally everything. And they're affecting plants' ability to photosynthesize by up to 12%. I mean, that's a staggering number when you think about the world's food security. And that those chemicals in there, it's not just the microplastics, it's the chemicals attached to them that are causing the additional damage, that just incredibly serious long-term consequences.
Are we finding, the chemicals from microplastics and microplastics themselves? Are we finding them in sample tissues of wildlife or, well, even humans?
Absolutely.
Really?
Yes.
Really? Why is the world so quiet about that? Like, this is a pretty big deal. What's standing in the way of getting the word out about microplastics?
Well, I think the word is coming out about microplastics. It's becoming top of
Yeah.
mind,
Yeah.
really. I've seen a lot of data that proves that. We have many studies throughout the world coming out. Here in Canada, we have, the U of T trash team. So there's a couple of professors there that have taken a really deep dive into microplastics here in Canada and North America, and the effects that they're having. Certainly, the UN and green building councils, the nature conservatories, the American Society of Interior Designers, the federal government here in Canada. I mean, I could go on with lists of thousands of organizations that are actively uniting to eliminate these plastic based materials. But I think it's about science. I think back about lead paint. And when we first started using lead paint, everyone thought it was fantastic, right?
Yep. Yep.
And it wasn't until later when the science started to prove that there were a lot of issues around lead paint. And lead paint is latex and acrylics baby brother. This is, it's gone further. Our population has soared. We're using it in every aspect of our lives. And yeah, it's just becoming more top of mind, both in science and I think with the public too.
Yeah. You know what I have to do? I have to get like a ecologist or some sort of professional that focuses entirely on microplastics and do a whole show, just and maybe even a couple of shows about the dangers. The fact that there's BPA being pumped into our waterways is just staggering to think about.
Well, yeah, and these chemicals are attached to these microplastics. So when they enter our bodies or the bodies of an insect or a worm or bird or mammal or crust, anything, it's going to have long term effects. And I'd be very happy to share a couple of documents with you that really drill down and talk about how serious it really is.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I'm definitely going to do a deeper dive on this.
Mhm.
Let's talk sort of big picture on sustainable design in general, as it's basically becoming non-negotiable in architecture. What do you see? How do you see the role of nature-based materials evolving in, healthy regenerative buildings over the next decade?
Yeah. Well, you raise a really good point. Nature-based materials are no longer optional. They really are the foundation of regenerative design. And if you think about it throughout the history of humanity, it's only really been the past, I want to say maybe 70 years since we started bringing synthetic materials into our building designs. But we can't really build a sustainable future using materials that pollute, persist, poison. And over the next decade, I think we'll see a dramatic rise in the cradle to cradle products. I think we're already seeing that. Materials that are circular, compostable, and non toxic by design, but maintain that high performance that we expect. And, these materials don't have to just reduce harm, they restore health to buildings and ecosystems. And yeah, I mean, I think that we're already seeing that trend, and it's like we're getting back to our roots. Human beings have always built their homes with natural materials, and it's only really after the Industrial Revolution and when we were creating synthetic polymers and other materials from crude oil that changed.
Manage the connection between building occupants and the outside world using Solera translucent glass. Learn more at advancedglazings.com. Do you see any threats out there that might push us backwards?
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest one that we observe almost on a day-to-day basis is greenwashing.
Right.
If we keep accepting that materials appear eco-friendly or environmentally safe, but still contain, without disclosure, plastics, solvents, toxins, then we're missing the opportunity for real change. If you look at a list on a paint can or on other building materials, you'll never see an ingredients list. And, transparency and integrity and material intelligence must guide us into the next generation of design. It shouldn't be full of smoke and mirrors.
Yeah, absolutely. No more greenwashing, as they used to say. Oh, I'm so excited about this. All right. So, Gina, we're at the part in the conversation where I ask my $1 million question. So, there's a question that I ask every single guest,
Okay.
and I ask them to respond to that question from whatever perspective they'd like. Okay. And the question is, what makes a great building?
Well, that's a really fantastic question and one that's near and dear to my heart, especially. I would say a great building supports life. It's not just about energy efficient, it's deeply human and deeply ecological. Like we have to live and exist and work in these buildings. So it should feel good to live in. The air should be safe. The materials should be free from harm or as free from harm as we can possibly make them. And the design should maybe tell a story of respect for us as human beings, for the land, and for future generations. So, green buildings aren't just structures, they're environments for health, creativity, life, connection. And I guess that they have to encompass that. And again, when we talk about transparency and materials, and so that we can make better choices in creating these healthier spaces for a healthier planet.
That was an absolutely brilliant answer. I love that. Gina, I know you have some exciting things happening in the near future. So before we go, I want to make sure that I give you an opportunity to share any big news or exciting announcements that you'd like to share.
Yes, and it's a huge step forward. So we're thrilled to announce that Pure Paint is launching with Lowe's USA, making us the first plant-based petroleum-free architectural paint to reach mainstream American retail. It's a major milestone for us and for the industry. It's going to make our products more accessible for the architect, decorator, designers that are, very strongly trying to, get those lead and well building and other statuses addressed. Also for the homeowners that are trying to create healthier spaces for them and their families. And we certainly are, we have just all finalizing a deal for a retail partnership here in Canada and two or three more to come. So we're really excited about this and very happy to be bringing our products to the broader public and giving them the opportunity to make a better choice.
That is wonderful news. Are you allowed to say names with regards to some of these new retail partners?
Well, Lowe's USA certainly is, they're the second
Hey,
largest
wow.
home improvement retail chain in the world.
Fantastic.
And I could say maybe, no, I'm sorry, I can't say the rest right now, but I
That's
will
okay.
be able to in a few more weeks.
That's okay. Lowe's, that's a big fish, as they say.
Mm.
So, congratulations. That's wonderful news, Gina. Gina, I can't thank you enough for making the time to do this. It was an absolute pleasure talking to you. And, I've had some conversations about microplastics before, but you've inspired me to do a little bit of a deeper dive on this. And my listeners can definitely expect to hear more on that subject matter in the near future. And for you, I wish the absolute best. Tell us your URL again, Gina, just to make sure people are.
Purepaint.ca. And Joe, I want to also say a big thank you to you for caring about the built environment and people in general. It means a lot to have spaces like this where we can talk about materials, health, and the future of the built environment in a real and honest way. I really believe these conversations matter, and the fact that you're giving voice to topics like microplastics, building wellness, and sustainability really shows your commitment to something bigger than just trends. So thank you for having us, and I'm really grateful to be part of it.
Well, I'm very fortunate to have the sponsorship of Advanced Glazings and to have the ability to do this. So thank you so much for your kind words, Gina. And let's stay in touch, okay?
Thank you.
All right. Take care. Bye bye.
Bye bye.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of Better Buildings for Humans. For more information on the world's best light diffusing and highly insulating glass glazing, please visit advancedglazings.com.